Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Brad Rosen. He's the VP of Revenue Operations over at G2 Crowd. Brad, how you doing today, man?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, other than getting over a little bit of a cold, but I'm no worse for wear and really been looking forward to having this conversation with you. We're going to be talking about the changing role of revenue operations, and I love some of the thoughts you're going to be sharing with listeners today. For a little bit of context, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about yourself and what you and the team at G2 Crowd are up to these days, man.
Yeah, happy to. Glad to be on and looking forward to our conversation. I'm Brad Rosen. I run revenue operations at G2. I grew up I'll give you a good background. I grew up in Michigan, so I love it there. Went to school in Wisconsin, go Badgers. And now I've been at G2 for 6.5 years, which has been an amazing ride. Started real early when we were just collecting reviews, and we had this idea of if you build it, they will come. You know, Yelp did it. Why can't we? And it turns out that if you build it, they will not come. People are much more excited about writing reviews on restaurants than they are about B2B business software. And so it takes quite a bit to build up. And we're significantly more differentiated from Yelp, but we've had a great run so far. And I started by building the sales and CS teams, and I'm now running revenue operations. And I think it's been a great ride, and really excited to talk about the role of RevOps and how it's changing.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are up to some great things, have been growing like crazy. We've had, several other members of the G2 team on some great episodes with Adam Goyette and other members of the team. So excited for you to bring your perspective. I hadn't realized you had been there for that long. I love your story there. And also, so many marketers, we think, or founders, in a lot of ways, if we build it, they will come. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But at the same time, people are coming now, and you guys have done some great things. So excited for you to share a little bit of wisdom with listeners today. So as we're talking about the changing role of RevOps, I think the first thing we have to do before we talk about some of the tactical things is back up and define it. So you're the VP of Revenue Operations at G2. How do you define revenue operations for your organization, and how do you see others defining it, just broadly in the space?
I think revenue operations has a broad definition, as you said, in the space. I think it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so I'll give you my definition within my role within our company, but I think it can change and evolve. And so from my perspective, it's literally everything that I can do on the back end of sales. So do everything we can to reduce the friction of our sales team and our sales leaders so that they can go out and sell. And so that could mean anything from creating territories to quotas to packages to pricing, training and enablement, Salesforce administration, sales operations, sales data analytics. So it's all of that. And that means taking anything that we can so that when our salespeople go out, they're trained, they're enabled, they have the right tools and the right processes to go out and be successful.
Yeah, I love it. So you touched on some different things there, sales ops, sales enablement. As you look at revenue operations for you guys or for other organizations that you're talking to, does that also include marketing ops? Like where are some of the blends or, what's kind of the structure there for you guys?
Yeah, for us, it does not. You mentioned Adam Goyette, who's been on the show, and he's kind of my partner in crime, as you will. And so we work really closely together. And I think that that's really a key point is they all kind of have to be in lockstep. And so whether that's under one person or you're just really tightly aligned and make sure that you're both striving towards the same thing, that's really the key. And so that's why when we think of revenue, we don't report up. He reports to the CMO, Ryan. I report to the CRO, Matt. But at the same time, Adam is in every one of our meetings. He's in, the weekly meetings. He's in the sales leadership meetings. He understands what's going on. So we can share all of our initiatives with him and he can share his with us so that we can make sure that we're driving towards the same goals, which ultimately is in the name, it's revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So, I like that dynamic duo, that 1-2 punch. If you guys are the dynamic duo behind the scenes, I'll let you guys fight it out over who's Batman, who's Robin.
I'll be Batman.
So tell us a little bit about your view on the evolution of this function. You talked about processes, quota assignment, territory assignment. There's also sales enablement and productivity, the tools side of it. Where have you seen the function of revenue operations really evolve in the last few years, Brad?
I think it's actually started to not just evolve, but become something. I think prior to a few years ago, the quotas and the territories and all that was probably run by finance, potentially the COO, the CFO in that organization. Sales had sales leaders who were focused on selling. And those two, there was generally some friction potentially, or at least very separation of duties. And now I think it's really important, just like I have a partner in crime on the marketing side, our CFO, Ted Weitzel, I'm really close with him as well. So we understand budgeting. We go over that together. We go over an understanding of, hey, are we going to hit our plan based on the operational side of things? We understand what packages should look like from a revenue standpoint. And so you have to make sure that you're aligned both ways, but having somebody in place that's running the operational side of things allows the team to move more quickly as opposed to having to get buy-in from other departments. And so I think that's why it's actually grown so much over the last few years, is because people are recognizing that especially when you have these high growth companies things are happening very quickly, you really need a central point to operationalize everything and then work with the other departments, whether that be marketing, finance, product, research, to be able to make sure that everybody is working in lockstep. And I do think tools help you in the sense of they can make you more productive. They can make you more collaborative, especially if you're working remotely or if you're traveling. But at the same time, it also makes it trickier to make sure that you're not buying every tool under the sun and that the tools all talk to each other and that we have the same accountability that we used to have, because now we have tools that can do all these things that we used to have to do ourselves. So tools can make things really great, but they can also make things more challenging as well.
It's story time, and this growth story is about search engine marketing. Okay, so the story revolves around eSub, a project management SaaS company specifically for subcontractors. Even though eSub had incredible customer retention, they struggled with growth. Being a niche service, they discovered that there was little demand expressed for their solutions within search engines. To take on this challenge, eSub hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. After refining targeting, pre-qualifying clicks with an ad copy, and developing custom landing pages, Directive was able to increase eSub's marketing qualified leads by 71%, while decreasing their cost per lead by 65%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Yeah, well, I want to come back to that in a second because there's something there to be said about, we talk about sales tech and we talk about MarTech almost in these separate conversations, right? But so much more. If there's going to be alignment between those functions, and like you said, there's important alignment with sales and not just marketing, but product and finance and these other areas. That having someone who has view or at least connection at the hip with the leaders of these other functional areas, that becomes really important. I wanted to ask here, though, as you talked about your evolution of your role within G2 from the sales and CS side, it seems like with smaller organizations or earlier stage startups, revenue operations is just kind of this shared duty between maybe sales and the operations or finance leader, in the early days. So where did you guys get to the tipping point of, okay, revenue operations needs to be its own thing, and as you built out that leadership team structure? I would love to hear about kind of that internal evolution, what you can speak to, because I think as teams are growing and fast growing these days, knowing where those tipping points are and how to manage those changes can be really important.
Yeah, the tipping point for us was about a year and a half ago when I started in the role. So what had happened is I had built the sales team and the BDR team and handed those off to our two amazing leaders now, Clay and Olivier, and then built up the CS team. And now we have an amazing leader there, Andrew. And so I actually started working on a lot of partnership stuff, which I thought was really fun and exciting. And we have a lot of opportunities for that. And our CEO came to me and said, "Hey, I want you to run revenue operations." And I said, "I don't know what that is." And he kind of gave a vague understanding, which, like we were talking about, that's why you said define it, right?
Yep.
So I said, "Well, let me think about it." And he came to me again, and I said, "Well, I still don't really know what that is." But he's like, "You do everything to make sure that sales runs smoothly." I was like, "Okay, I can get a little more understanding, logical." But still, thanks, but I'll think about it. And then the third time he asked, I said, "Okay, I understand. Sometimes you get the hint after time 3 of asking." And it actually was an amazing opportunity. I do have a finance background, which I think helps, because I do think you need to have an analytical understanding of data and being able to build certain models to understand your costs versus your revenues, understanding quotas, commissions, territories, all has to do with analytics behind it. But it does help. I do think that the modern RevOps leader has to have some selling experience, or at least an understanding of the sales process, because I do believe that just running a spreadsheet does not allow you to actually understand the rules and regulations and the rules of engagement that you're putting into place for a salesperson and a sales leader, because they think very differently. They think very emotionally. They're not a spreadsheet. They're a person. They're a human. They react differently because they have feelings, and they have understandings of motivations. Everyone's motivated very differently. So being able to combine those things is really important. And at our company, that happened around, I'd say, closing in on about 200 people and probably about 50 reps, because of the idea that you get to a certain point where training and enablement needs to be ramped up very quickly, because you're hiring a lot of people, and you can't just turn around and ask the rep next to you for advice. Because first of all, they may not be next to you because you have a bigger office, or you have satellite offices and different things. And the second thing is, once you play, as you know, we all grew up playing the game of telephone. By the time it gets to like the fourth or fifth person, it's actually not what we originally stated, right? It's not what we wanted the messaging to be. And so you really need strong enablement. And you also need processes. People want to understand, okay, how am I getting paid? When am I getting paid? What are the expectations? I want that, and I want it more than just a conversation. It's got to be really strong and tight. And then as the numbers get bigger, you have the board and management saying, okay, well, how are we tracking towards these things? Before we'd say, well, I know all the deals. I can kind of put together what my projections are. I have a spreadsheet, and we put it together, run a Salesforce report, and we're good. And you can't just throw the dart at the wall when you get to that size, because you will inevitably miss the target.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on something interesting there. I think there's a good mixture to be had with sales experience and some analytical or finance experience as well. Talk a little bit about, how you've managed some of those changes in RevOps that have rolled out to the team. Maybe some of the lessons learned is now we can focus on all this stuff, but we need to do it the right way so it doesn't have some unintended consequences, right?
Yeah. And I think that that's part of growing and learning as you have a larger sales team with folks that you may not know as well, or maybe, like I said, are in different states, different countries, all over the place. You really have to be cognizant of a lot of communication and understanding how are people going to take changes, let's say changes, especially in, say, a comp plan or quotas or territories, because that's how people make a living. That's how they put a roof over their head. And so if you are going to make those changes, a lot of times those changes actually come from obviously a board or executive level decisions to make sure we're understanding, okay, what are our costs? You're looking at lifetime values of customers versus customer acquisition costs. What you're starting to break it down by segment to understand which segments are profitable, more profitable versus others, and try and making hard decisions based on those types of things. And so there's rationale behind all these changes, explaining that rationale, but also gathering feedback from the sales team as a whole and any leadership before the changes, I think is really important, because you want them to be heard. And frankly, they have a lot of really great insight that you may not have when you're sitting at your desk and you're in a spreadsheet and you're just kind of thinking in your own world. You need to also understand what's going on in the field and what are the changes and how can we make sure that we motivate people properly. Because a lot of times it's not always about dollars and cents. Sometimes it's about hitting your quota. Sometimes it's about they want to receive little spiffs throughout the year because that gets them motivated and pumped up, or they want to compare themselves to other reps within the role. So getting feedback, I think, is really important, especially when you're making big changes, and then explaining the rationale behind things, and then having a discourse. So having a really good relationship with the team as a whole is really important.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like you're able, with this revenue operations layer between sales leadership and the executive level and the board. There's almost more room for thoughtful back and forth. Sales leadership is so focused on hitting the number, on ramping new reps, on closing deals, with their team. That these things that are important, they can be big levers and turning points in the motivation of your team and the efficiency of your team, but you just have more time to dedicate to these specific elements. Would you say that's really kind of one of the biggest benefits to having dedicated revenue operations leadership as you build out your organizational structure, Brad?
Absolutely. We don't want our sales leaders or salespeople thinking about, hey, how should we package this new feature in, and what should we call it, and how much should it price, and how should we implement it into CPQ, and what should it look like on the order form? Like, can you imagine if our reps were spending the time doing that and not picking up the phone and not having phone calls? That would be terrible. And so that's why we take that on, right? And so sometimes it's I would say not a glamorous job, but it's really interesting. And I think that understanding the business aspect of what we're doing is really great, but it definitely takes a certain skill set, but it's also how do we allow them a delegation of duties? Because you know what? They're much better salespeople than I will ever be, right? And so they have certain skill sets that I don't necessarily have, and they have certain skills that, then I have certain skill sets that they don't have. And so it's a great symbiotic relationship from myself to the sales leadership to be able to say, hey, you take on the heavy lifting on the operational side so that we can continue to be in the field and keep the wheels turning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where you get some friction and you get some burnout. The more that you have, whether it's sales or marketing or any function, really, when you have people not, operating in their maximum capacity, proficiency, and passion, then you get burnout, especially in a high growth startup. So the more that you can start to segment these different things between operations and actual time spent selling, and keep people laser focused and repeating the things that they do really well, then you're going to have more growth, because you're not going to have that friction that slows you down at times.
Absolutely. And I think that's key, is to understanding. And like I said, in our organization, we do have a leader who runs marketing ops. He's really good at marketing ops, and he's really understands the tools and the people that are needed to succeed in that area. And, so I leave that to him, and I make sure that I focus on the things that I'm really strong and proficient at. And that's the sales operations side of things. That's the enablement. That's the partnerships. That's what we're able to build on our side of the house.
Yeah, I love it. You guys are obviously doing a lot of things right. I love you sharing a little bit of a peek behind the curtain and a little bit of your journey as you guys have built out, obviously, a very successful revenue organization. And Adam and Ryan and the rest of the marketing team are doing a great thing on their side, joined at the hip with you guys. So obviously, you guys are doing a lot of things right, Brad. If people listening to this would like to stay connected with you, pick your brain on anything revenue, ops, sales related, or anything else, what's the best way for them to stay connected with you or reach out in the future, man?
Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Brad Rosen. I work at G2, so it's not too hard to find me. And I would love to connect with everybody, whether that be sales, marketing, ops. And I do think that all these roles are starting to become interconnected. And so looking forward to networking with everybody within the industry.
I love it. Brad, thanks so much for joining me on the show today, man. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Have a great one.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.